It's 9:01 this morning. Welcome, everybody. And I'd like to begin with a roll call, Michelle. Thank you.
Committee Member Vincent?
Who? Is that me? Okay, thank you.
I
I didn't hear that.
Benson, yeah.
Vincent. Committee Member Calapetro?
Here.
Committee Member Schwartz?
Here.
Committee Member Maturo?
Here.
Committee Member Sims?
Here.
And Councilwoman Gallagher?
Here. Okay. I think that we will go ahead and proceed to the first ordinance. Would maybe, Derek, do you read that, or Michelle?
I will be happy to read it.
Thank you.
I'll make sure I got two ordinances here. All right, the first ordinance is an ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs Land Development Code. No, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. Sorry. An ordinance for consistency with the comprehensive plan of, where's the first ordinance? Is it on there? Or is it just the, I'm not seeing a packet. Oh, you're just reading it. Okay, but there's no title. All right. An ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs amending the comprehensive plan of City of Bonita Springs as adopted by ordinance number 0216 as amended, considering the remaining state mandated amendments on the evaluation and appraisal reports so as to amend the future land use element, coastal conservation management element, and the capital improvements elements to revise and update the remaining existing goals, objectives, and policies and data analysis in accordance with the mandates set forth in Chapter 163 Florida statutes, providing for transmittal to the state land planning agency, providing for conflicts clause and severability clause, and providing for an effective and for other purposes. I don't know what the other purposes is.
Okay, thank you. Are there public comments to be made at this point, or? Okay.
Should be discussion on it, shouldn't
And
it?
discussion, okay, and I'm wondering, I see Margaret out there. At what point do you want to make your comments? Well, you want to make it on the second part.
No, it's the first part.
So I think Dr. Banyan actually has a presentation.
Presentation, yeah.
Yes.
And that will walk you through the subject amendments and why we're here and what we're charged.
I guess that was my point. I was trying to decide if she wanted to do it first, before we start.
Beneficial?
And, you know, there are no comments out there, so, Margaret? Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. So just kind of some perspective and time-wise, I have a group of 49 students in American National Government who will be waiting to take their quiz at 10:30 this morning. So I need to sort of wrap up around 9:45 or so. I have also told them that if I'm not there right on the dot, that they are not excused. So they've been warned. Because this is important enough that I want to make sure that you have your questions answered. So I just have a short presentation to kind of walk you through a little bit about why you're seeing what you see here. I think this is a new, So you probably remember sort of the history of some of the amendments. We've been working at this since 2016, where we did the first evaluation and appraisal. And at that time, we suggested that there was some things that were required to be changed by the state. So we made those changes in 2017. And at that time, there were several relatively big issues that we were not able to wrap up in that first phase of amendments. So you may know that the state requires you to finish all your state required amendments first before you can process any other additional changes to the comprehensive plan. So that's why you're seeing a few amendments that are wrapping up those state required. In the fall, that's where we're at now. We will be bringing forward at some point some additional optional amendments as directed by council. The scope of those, we may add a little bit to the scope of those amendments. But just so you know, as soon as we wrap up the state-required amendments, we have to do a 60-day review at the state, and so before there's transmittal. So we need to get these processed through quickly so that we can have everything positioned by late fall. All right, so just as a reminder, there was sort of, when we did the EAR, there was 3 buckets of tasks. One was those that were state required, those that were suggested by annexation, and then those were optional amendments. So council, the last time we spoke with them, they had asked us to work on the optional amendments, annexation, and those related to the future land use element, the housing element, and the transportation element. So anything additional beyond state required, it would be in those first 3 elements. Of course, because you have a comprehensive plan and there's some of these issues are dealt with in other elements, if there's some suggested changes, for example, in the future land use element that we need to make consistent with another capital improvements or another, we would make those additional changes. But the 3 leading elements in the optional would be those 3: future land use, transportation, and housing. So where we're at now is the focus for today, of course, is the state required amendments and being able to wrap those up. So the first one was around clarifying concurrency. There was some discussion about whether we wanted to make changes in the concurrency and how to ensure that landowners could move forward with approval. So just a little background and context, the state in 2011 made transportation concurrency optional. So what that meant was you could no longer deny a development order or permit based on a failing level of service for transportation, parks, and schools. So we had some additional work to do on concurrency. Really, that's, I mean, overall, not a big lift in these amendments. So I'm not going to really focus on that too much, but we'll go through the changes that we have made after the presentation. But the bigger thinking piece was the coastal management element, the conservation and coastal management element, because of the coastal high hazard changes that the state required. So we have to walk with me through these maps here. So this is your existing coastal high hazard map. Okay,
We're all working through this that we just got, right then? These are the maps you're referring to?
Yes, that's in both of your documents. So that's in, you should have in front of you, yes, that as well as
Yes, this.
the
I
future
was
land
thinking
use element.
This was additional to what we had. It's a repeat, so we have 2 of
Yes,
them.
yes.
Right.
It also appears in your future land use element in the very back. And I can walk you through that too.
Okay.
And it also, yeah, so you should have your future land use element changes, conservation and coastal management element, as well as the capital improvements element. So just to kind of recap your, how do I go backward? I'm going forward. Okay. Can you fix it for me? I don't know how. I want to be on slide 4. Okay, sorry about that. So the concurrency mostly appears in your capital improvements element, and the coastal management and coastal high hazard appears both in the future land use element and in the coastal and conservation element. So that's why you have 3 in front of you. Okay. All right, so existing coastal high hazard map appears like this. This is in the future land use element and also in the staff report that you were handed. It's figure 7. And what this map was more or less an administrative area where you could apply some pretty strong policies about growth and development. And so the state does allow you to do that. It allows you to go above and beyond to provide protections for these areas that you see at risk, either of flooding or storm surge or the impacts of sea level rise. So this map, again, appears in the future land use element, but also the majority of the policies that you see associated with this map appear in your conservation and coastal management element. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about. So you have this map, you have a set of policies, goal 5 and goal 6 primarily associated with that map. So then the state came along in 2011 and they started defining what the coastal high hazard area was going to be. So remember, the previous map was called your coastal high hazard map. But the state came along and said, look, this is really what your coastal high hazard area must be. So they said it has to be defined as the area below the elevation of the Category 1 storm surge line as established by their slosh model. And it's a computerized storm surge slosh model. So you have a coastal high hazard map. The state's saying this is what your coastal high hazard area is. So mapped, this is what that looks like. Okay, so as far as the state is concerned, that is your coastal high hazard map. Okay. You'll notice in the next slide, these areas are very different. Okay, so the challenge is we couldn't just flat out replace your coastal high hazard map because you would lose protections in some areas and gain protections in others. So we could not just swap out maps and say this is now your coastal high hazard map. So again, on the left-hand side of the screen, you have an area where you have pretty strong protections. On the right-hand side of the screen, that's your state-required coastal high hazard map. So we need to change the name of the map, number 1. But we also need to consider the implications of the policies that you have in place. Okay, so what we are thinking about is you've got 2 options, and we can go into some discussion here. One is create what we've done in your amendments is create an area called the coastal management area. And this coastal management area is primarily associated with your goal 5. Have 2 maps. One map would be the coastal high hazard map as defined by the state. Second map would be the coastal management area. Okay, now that leads us to another decision, which is what should the boundaries be of the coastal management area. So this map reflects generally your existing boundaries of the existing, I'm going to say old coastal high hazard area, with the addition of the annexed properties in the little finger. I call it a little finger on the sort of the west side of the map. So that's the area shaded in blue. What that would do is keep your policies consistent. It would comply with the state regulations, but it would add in no new property other than the annexed areas. Those annexed areas, by the way, have always been in the coastal high hazard area historically. Okay. The second option would be to combine these 2 maps expand your coastal management area map to meet the coastal high hazard area as defined by the state. What that would do is, and on this map, it appears green. Those areas of overlap appear green because green or blue and yellow make green. But we added in another legend just to make that more clear that those are the areas of overlap. What this would do is include the flood-prone areas also in your coastal management policies. These are generally east of Old 41. And they do stretch pretty far to I-75, mostly along Bonita Beach Road as the additional areas.
Let me ask a question. The blue area above the green that's encapsulated, that was on the map that we have now is covered.
Yes.
Now it's coming out. What is the reason for that difference? Why is that one now pulled out of, or is an option over what we have now? That little area there. You know what I'm asking?
No.
Okay. There are two options, yeah. The one I'm talking about, yeah, Jay, it's that one right there. In our map that we currently have, that area is covered.
That should not be pulled out. If that was pulled out,
If you go back to the other slide there, that one there, see?
that should be covered in blue.
Yes.
Yes.
It's now in blue.
Yes.
And so it's not, what is in green is what we're suggesting as an area that we would consider as being covered, if you will, term. But that little section is not, and I'm wondering why not. We're almost back to the
little
original
section
map.
should still be in blue.
Uh-huh.
So what we're saying is, one option is keep with your
Current,
current boundaries
right,
and apply your policies with the current boundaries.
right.
Second option is, in every area that the coastal high hazard, the new one,
Right,
is, expand the coastal management area to that. So the green is really only the areas of overlap.
okay,
Your-
overlap,
your-
okay.
Your entire coastal management area in this option would be everything in blue as well as everything in green.
I got you.
Yes.
The reason I asked the question, it's important for insurance reasons.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I still have a question. I'm assuming that the white kind of line, is that 75 that comes down?
Yes.
Okay, and on the original coastal high hazard area map, it didn't look like it went over that far. But on the state one, it does, but
That is.
you have it
correct.
as
Your
an
original
overlap, but I'm not sure that it was, I don't know, that it was there.
I'm sorry, Jen.
I'm talking about probably down Bonita Beach Road, 75 area-ish.
Yes, that's
That
your.
does not appear to be on that map as part of the coastal high hazard area, is it? Am I missing that?
And again, that map was based on, I think it was 2004 data. So since that time, you can imagine technology and
curious,
modeling has been greatly enhanced. So now we have better data analysis. So when they run the models based on, as Margaret said, the Category 1 storm surge slosh model, you're going to see some differences in the maps, especially along your riverine areas and your creeks.
Right.
And then the canal system. So that's why you see some of that change as we have better data.
Some of that area down there flooded.
And that could be a little different. This is based on, as Margaret said, storm surge, Category 1. It's probably not going to address, other regulatory agencies such as FEMA with FEMA flood zones, or like our sheet flow issues that come from the center of the state.
Yeah.
This is your storm surge Category 1, your hurricane.
Okay, but you also have it on the final one is an overlap.
Yes.
But it was never on the first one. It was never on the coastal high
Yes,
hazard.
this is
It
2004.
was just a map.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
I have a question. this all involves the restrictions on rebuilding after a storm?
Yes.
Okay, I'm a little confused on, so the new option would increase that area that would be restricted on a storm rebuild,
Yes, so,
a substantial amount of area.
so in option one, it's pretty much the same.
Okay,
Option two, yes, there would be additional restrictions.
a
In the
substantial
areas.
amount.
Yes, in the areas, and primarily it's the areas east of Old 41. So if we could zoom in a little bit, you could see that's when Old 41 comes down, you've got some areas that are, the storm surge is telling you will flood, right? So those are the additional areas, and that's primarily what is east of Old 41. Yes.
But I think, Mr. Sims, I think some of the concerns that you have, we have policies in the comprehensive plan about post-disaster build-back policies, where if we have an existing home and as a result of a natural disaster, it is destroyed and there's thresholds, there is the ability to rebuild, but you have to rebuild to current building code standards and federal standards. So these policies won't affect that. Where it does, it's really more so on the redevelopment and increasing.
But I understand there's some areas that there would be no, in front of the coastal zone line, there would be no rebuilding. Is that, am I reading that right?
Construction,
Pardon?
coastal construction line.
Yes, there would be no rebuilding.
And that's always been in your,
I know, but it's always been, but I guess I asked the wrong question.
yeah,
Are we increasing that area with the new map?
the coastal construction line?
Yes.
No,
So it remains the same.
it's the same.
It's just the areas that include, in a case of rebuild, a substantially different coding and so forth is what we're talking about now.
Yeah. And I think the differences in terms of density and intensity, those areas would have some additional restrictions. And we can go, what my
And it would change
suggestion is,
the first floor elevation and all those sorts of things.
if that's in land development code, is that the code?
There's other codes that
Yeah,
go ahead and
but I say that would now be affected in this new area also. Okay.
One more question if I could. So the state is saying that this is what you're responsible for by state standards or statutes.
Yes.
However, with the blue, the council makes a decision on covering a larger area than that, right?
Right,
Okay. And that's a decision they have to make?
yes.
Yeah, so that's big for them.
They're gonna have to choose which is the
One or the
boundary
other.
of this coastal management area.
I think that that's just very hard to envision how that's, for me, how it's going to affect us.
Well, if they choose
Are-
what the state statute says, then it's a lot less area that the city has to be responsible for, or there are greater restrictions in that area for rebuilding.
Right.
So let me add one more thing that's also in the report. You'll see, and what I want to do is have you understand the maps, and then let's walk through the policies so that you understand all the implications before you think about kind of which one makes more sense. The other thing that we've added is with the state coastal high hazard area, what the state requires is that those properties, no matter what Bonita Springs coastal management area, no matter what the blue area is going to be, the state requires that in their coastal high hazard area, then you have to meet hurricane evacuation standards. So that's really non-negotiable in a way to say that no matter what choice you make, you still have to have a state-defined coastal high hazard area. And with that coastal high hazard area, all of those properties have to meet a hurricane evacuation. So that is what it is. I think the question for you when we go through the policies is, do you think that these additional areas east of Old 41 should have additional restrictions in terms of density, intensity, some of the build back, some of the infill kinds of restrictions? So that's going to be really more where you've got some thinking to do.
Yes, that,
And when we do recommend to the council, I guess, issues concerned with that, we would have to know something about the current FEMA requirements, wind zones, and things like that, flood zones and so forth. So if we recommend to the council, hey, we want you to cover all of these areas east of Old 41 Road, what we're saying is that those people there would need to be, I guess, helped, or that in their rebuilding, they would get some help in rebuilding, or they can rebuild without the strong restrictions.
So, yes, and I think the thing that we have to remember about this area east of 41 is the science is telling you that those are problematic.
That's exactly right, because some of those areas are X. In X, you have no restrictions there for first floor elevation. So if we recommend that we adopt that, then you're saying those areas there would have to meet new FEMA requirements, right?
No,
Not necessarily?
let's walk through the policies and you
Alright.
can see from
Before
the,
we
Yeah.
diverse here, clear up something for me. One of the issues that you're bringing up about the area around the Old 41 area, which ultimately we look to as a residential development area, that it's going to require substantial increase in evacuation.
no matter what you do, it will.
Okay.
Because those new areas are in the coastal high hazard area.
All right, so in areas like that where we want to have housing, for example, and employee housing and so forth, and we've looked to increase densities in order to qualify that, then that is really a handicap to us to have additional evacuation, is what you're saying. So that a lot of the thinking that we've done in the past about the plans for the area in the downtown area as far as residential, that would have to have a different thought process now.
Yeah, I think, but we also, there's some provisions in that
Okay.
section that exempt the downtown area.
Oh, all right.
So we've had this discussion about downtown and there's not I mean, I think there's some concerns. We want to look at it again to make sure that we have everything we need to protect some of the downtown plans. But at the same time, the existing policies do exempt downtown,
A portion of downtown.
a portion of downtown.
does this also include actual evacuation, like a plan to get people out?
Yes, everything.
So it's not just building codes and building standards and so on?
Yeah, how about we walk through,
So-
can we walk through the policies, just because Dr. Banning only has a little bit of more time, and we can talk about some of these extra.
And I'm also concerned too there's too many things going through my mind, but about shelters and stuff like that, so I don't know where that even comes in.
So that's really in your existing comprehensive plan. I mean, I think that the changes, there's some implications, but the changes are fairly limited in terms of what this area affects.
I think just to move things along fast and kind of get, I think I know where all the questions are going. If Dr. Banyan and Jackie go through the policies, and then the question you might want to ask at the end is, what are the practical effects of the two options you have on people, the existing homes in those areas and redevelopment in those areas? I think that's probably really what you're concerned about, what's
That's what
going to
I'm,
happen.
yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out, what is going to happen if we choose one or the other.
Plus, we only have 15 minutes.
I know, oh, sorry about that.
We can start at 20, the students can.
Pardon?
They've been told they are
Oh.
waiting.
They could come here and take the
I
test?
challenged them, I said, if you can find the policy at the university that says that if the professor doesn't show up for 15 minutes, you can leave. If you can find that policy, I'll hold you to it. Otherwise, you're here.
Are you gonna be taking names when you get back?
Well, they have a quiz, so I think that they're motivated to be there. So there's some, as we walk through the changes, there's some that are related to concurrency, but I suggest we start in the future land use element. And if that's, we've got everything highlighted.
Tell me what page you're going to.
Okay, we'll be on the packet that you were given this morning,
Handout.
on the handout. Page 5 is the first page.
The same one we've been looking at the maps on. No, that doesn't.
This is going to be your future land use element.
Looking at future, got it?
You should have a footer that says page numbering for discussion purposes.
Yep.
Yes,
Got it. I think I have it.
yeah. So look for the footer, page 5. Policy 1.1.4.1 is just addressing something in statute that we had put in gross acreages in each future land use category. But this policy is in addition, so that we don't have to amend the text every time there's a small scale amendment. So, and then there's a numbering change below that. Page 7, policy 1.1.8.1, that area it's been in your old coastal high hazard, and it would be in your new coastal management area. So that category is not affected in
Just
either
verbiage.
option.
Just verbiage.
Yes, in either option, these categories are not.
I'm a little confused about one thing here. When the FEMA map changes, how does that involve this?
This is not reflecting the FEMA map. So the slosh model by the state is done by the National Hurricane Center.
Okay.
So, and then it goes through the Department of Emergency Management. There are some overlap, but the FEMA model, as far as I understand, is more of a flooding model, right? So you could get flooding from different impacts. So during Irma, right, Jackie was telling me it was a sheet flow flood. What's required by the state is purely Category 1 storm surge.
Okay.
So there's some overlap, but there's not a one-to-one.
Well, the present FEMA map shows the flood zone down as far as Banyan Tree
Yeah,
from the surge and so
yes,
forth.
you may have,
So
still may have
Banyan
floods.
Tree is the cutoff date, but yet there's more than that included here.
Yes.
I thought they were dependent on each other, but you say they're entirely separate, okay.
Yeah, again, there's overlap, probably under the low-lying areas, but they're not, they're two different kinds of modeling.
Okay?
Yep. Okay, so page 8, again, verbiage change. Okay, we don't get anything until page 22. And there's another change, and that's related to concurrency. Let me know when you're there. Okay, so that change is because you cannot deny permits anymore based on a failing level of service for transportation, parks and schools. So we needed to change the language to reflect that change. So we're just saying now that you're going to meet the concurrency standards as mandated in the capital improvements element. We just simplified a lot there. Okay. The next change is on page 26. And that's really just a clarification. So we wanted to clarify that the acreage calculation in the DRGR category, that some of that still is in Lake County's, it's not been given a future land use category in the city of Bonita Springs, so we wanted to clarify if the annexed lands and the DRGR had not been given a category, then they still are gonna go by the other policy related to annexed lands.
This is basically the mine,
Yes,
2,600 acre mine, okay.
yeah. It's really just a clarification. Page 27, the CHHA now became the CMA. And that's related to mobile home parks. Page 28, that's the downtown language that used to say CHHA, now says CMA. No matter which option you pick, there's no effect there. Okay, your next change is on page 32. Same thing. Coastal high hazard became coastal management area. And then policy 1.8.2 is just an update of the title of that document. Okay, now the next change we get is in the maps. And that is on page 50. So that CHHA map should be deleted. Option 1 would be for you to, on page 51, that's your option 1. And then the next, on page 52, that's option 2, your option 2 map. And then finally, on page 56, is the new coastal high hazard area map as defined by the state. So just a quick summary, figure 12, we believe is still necessary because it clearly defines with state statute to define a coastal high hazard area. We realize that it's also reflected in option 2, but it's very clear that you have a coastal high hazard area if you add figure 12. And that's not going to be impacted by either option you choose. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So let's move on to the conservation and coastal management element. Again, there's some changes here, and I think when we walk through these policies, you'll see sort of the implications a little bit more. So again, this document should have the page number for discussion purposes at the footer. Okay. First one we're looking at is on page 3. What we've done in that policy, or in goal 5, is to say that goal 5 is about protecting life and property in the coastal high hazard and the coastal management areas. Okay? If you agree with option 2, we would add a sentence that says that the coastal management area includes the coastal high hazard area in its entirety. If you don't choose option 2, that sentence would not appear there. So objective 5.1 is only about the coastal high hazard area. So remember I said that the state requires in your coastal high hazard area you have evacuation provisions. So these are the evacuation provisions that the state requires. And those are not new. You've had those in your comprehensive plan. We just moved them. So these are not new policies about evacuation. They're just moved specifically to under the coastal high hazard area. Okay, you with me? All right. And then we get to objective 5.2. And other than a lot of yellow, what has changed in objective 5.2, instead of referring to the coastal high hazard area, it now refers to the coastal management area. So some numbering has changed. The new objective says the city should minimize flood risk that results from high tide events, storm surge, flash flood, stormwater runoff, and the related impacts of sea level rise in the coastal management area. So your policy, all of these policies have remained the same. They just now apply to your coastal management area. So this is about rezoning to higher densities, shoreline development, reduced densities. It's about policy 5.2.4. That's the policy that allows downtown to still develop a portion of. It's about land acquisition in number 5, and then redevelopment and major development has to conform to the flood damage protection ordinance. Policy 5.2.7 refers to mobile home parks. 5.2.8 refers to the coastal construction line. 9 refers to seawalls, and 10 refers to site development techniques to reduce losses due to flooding. And then moving on, goal 6 is really about public expenditures in that area. So the implication, of course, is that if you want to limit your public expenditures in your CMA area, whichever your CMA area is, you're going to want to think about kind of how much the city invests there. Those are the very substantive changes about the coastal management area until there's some verbiage changes later on here. Oh, on page 25, it's just we fixed the reference to the Department of Community Affairs. It's now the Florida Division of Emergency Management, because you remember DCA went away. Page 27 replaces CHHA with CMA. And I couldn't help it, but I fixed a spelling typo. I know that it's not state required, but I just couldn't help myself. And then again on page 42, I fixed a typo. It's not conversation. It's
Over my
conversion. So that's it for the coastal management element. And then we've just got a little bit more to go through in the capital improvements element. Okay, and so that again should have the footer on it that says for discussion, page numbering for discussion purposes. The first page, we fixed evaluate and update the capital improvements element. We said review. The reason is the state only requires that you review it. So you don't want to annually update if you don't have to. Second page, the CIP, your capital improvements plan is going to conform to the standards mandated by state statute. Okay, page 5. The substantive change there is the state no longer requires a financially feasible capital improvements element. And then we fixed a few typos. Page 6, the state no longer refers to fair share or proportionate fair share. They just refer to proportionate share. So those are all just to create some consistency with state. Then what you'll see on the bottom of page 6, under enforcement of standards, those are the concurrency standards that are not required by the state, that refers to parks and schools. And it says the conditions under which, if there's a failing level of service, the city could approve. And those are not new, they're just moved because it was much more clear to separate parks and schools from transportation, because they're a different animal in terms of how the state treats them. So the options remain that if there's a failing level service for parks and schools, the developer can build something or they can pay the city. And if the facility is already in the plan, of course, they don't have to, they can move forward with approval. Under transportation facilities, though, we want to be sure that we meet all of the state requirements for approving transportation projects. To simplify and to make everything consistent with the state, we developed new language that says that development that may cause level service standards to fall below the adopted minimum may proceed with approval under the condition it meets the requirements of state statute, and we refer to the statute. And that statute talks about working with the State Department of Transportation on state facilities. It talks about exempting transit. It talks about proportionate share and how you do proportionate share. All of these things are things that the city's doing and is reflected in the land development code. There may be some small updates to the land development code that may be required after this point, but those would just be consistent with the state. So to clarify everything, we removed what was on page 7. The middle of page 7 is, we took out financial feasibility. On page 8, we talk about approving the sufficient capacity level of service, because we have 2 policies now, 1.2.1 and 1.2.2. We added 1.2.2. On page 9, I fixed a typo. Middle of page 9, we no longer have a male city manager, so I added a his or her. Same thing on page 11, I took out the gender reference. And then the last changes here, we removed your old, this is on page 12 and 13. We removed your old capital improvements projects. The state now allows the city to update the element with its new capital improvement plan during the budget process, and that doesn't require state review, so we left the
What page are you on?
this is page 14. So we took out 13. We took out the schedules on 12 and 13 because they were
Okay,
old.
so I still have a 13 here.
Wait, you still have a 13?
Are we still going by the numbered pages? Does anybody else have a 13?
12, page 12 and 13, we took out all of the old capital improvement schedules.
Okay, are those charts like this, or?
There's a blue, should be a blue line between them. I didn't do a big red X.
Okay, so I should put X's on 12 and 13.
Yes.
Did anybody?
It looks like a blue line. Track changes doesn't do great with some of these.
I don't see anything. Does anybody?
No lines, no.
No lines.
I just put an X through 'em.
So page 12 and 13 X's.
Yes.
All right,
I don't know why that didn't come through.
okay. That's what I was wondering. I was.
Okay,
looking
yeah,
for
those
the
are
changes and stuff.
deleted.
It wasn't going along with what you were saying. So-
Yes.
All right.
So on page 14 and 15 and 16, the city's updated those, so we left them alone. Those are current. They'll probably be updated again during budget cycle. And then on page 17, We worked with the Bonita Springs utilities to get a new capital improvement project schedule. So you can see everything in red that is old is updated with the yellow highlighting. Last change is on page 18, where we say possible amendments to the capital improvements element, because there may or may not be amendments. And then again, took out the gender reference. That brings me to 9:51. So I have a few more minutes if we want to.
Appreciate that. I am still a little confused.
There's a lot to digest.
I think where I'm a little confused is just what Derek was saying, is how this goes into affecting the cost to the city, the cost to the people, financial as well as their own physical cost and everything of having to do things that, so I don't know, does anybody have any?
So an existing landowner, right now, in these new areas east of Old 41, unless they're
We're west of Old 41, right?
east of Old 41 is the new area. Yeah. So they're not going to bear any new cost, right? However, right, if you've got build-back policies, and if they want to increase density on their site, there would be some implications.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
Yes. So those are, I mean, I'm summarizing, and maybe you want to add something else, but I'm summarizing is that when you're making changes, increasing density, talking about if you want to place a mobile home park there, you would no longer be able to. Part of the question is, should there be mobile home parks there? Part of the question is, if the science is telling you that there's going to be an issue during a Category 1 storm surge, I mean, should there be an ability to increase densities beyond what was in the comp plan? So, I mean, that's really, I think, where your, kind of where your rub is.
I would put it very similar, and that is, the current policy basically is where the CMA, the blue is. And if we have the CMA in the blue, and we do the two separate areas, basically you're not changing anything except for what will naturally occur with FEMA and all that, which we have no control over. So we're not really changing anything there. The implication is it's sort of a double-edged sword if you add it to the other area. Obviously, you want to get rid of the mobile home parks and so forth, but we're not going to make anybody get rid of them unless they're totally destroyed. And then even so, you have some build-back policies you have to address. My concern from a planning perspective and with the downtown would be hamstringing the city with denying them the potential of giving bonus densities and stuff to encourage people to get rid of the things you want to get rid of, to encourage people to redevelop the way you'd want to. You're going to tie your hands potentially. Now, there is an exemption in the downtown for a portion of it. So that's the reason I don't want to scare anybody or anything. There's this sort of wavy little line there of how it can affect. But if you leave the CMA the way that it is with the blue, basically you've affected no change, no substantive change on the existing condition, other than it is very clear that we have, which we're required by state law now anyway, the evacuation. And even that, I think, is arguably okay, because we have an evacuation time we have to meet in order to satisfy the state. And that's spelled out in statute. The thing is that to have the two separate zones, I think, is even okay, because it's going to take a whole lot longer to get off the island than it is to get on 75 if you're right next to 75. And to identify the zones that way and to make a policy decision and a conscientious decision that says, we're fine with this little area that we know is going to be affected by a storm surge. But because of their access to 75 and because of where they are, we don't see the need to impose all those other regulations that we will impose on everybody that is to the west of 41 because of the densities, the volume of traffic, the lack of bridges, and all those other things that have those implications. And so it becomes this policy decision of what do you think is best, more or less the status quo with natural evolution or embracing further change to the east of 41.
So can I just sort of just do a real quick exercise here is that if you read and go to page 4 of the coastal conservation management element.
Mr. Street, if the Dean Street project were coming up under this new plan, with a 50-foot right-of-way on Dean Street for evacuation, would that have an effect on that?
I'd have to go through and plot the actual exemption area that is in to determine that.
But that's the kind of thing that we're looking at here.
But if, let's say that just to the east of Dean Street, which is included in that, it would be affected because that is definitely outside the exemption area, which is part of the downtown overlay. So if at the corner of, and there's property, for instance, at the corner of Matheson and Dean, there's 5 acres for sale there. And if somebody wanted to come in and do something that they wanted to get bonus density for, then that could be affected by how you change it.
Because,
Let me,
as we discussed before, there's 50 foot, and that's all there's ever going to be.
Right.
so let me also say, I don't think the story's told in the end on the downtown area, because you still have the ability under the optional amendments to rethink some of these policies related to downtown. It's not prohibiting you, this is still a living document, right? So you can still deal with downtown under these policies. That would be some additional discussion about, does that make sense? Does it make sense in terms of evacuation? Does it make sense in terms of build back, right? So it's not, I just want to be sure that, and we've talked with outside counsel about this as well, is, and really it's a policy call rather than something that we're recommending you do one or the other. And so it's just, our job is to make sure you understand the implications. But I think if you read through the policy 5.2 or objective 5.2, and if you think about it this way, anything new, the new area, they would be impacted by these new policies, right? So that's the implication of the decision that you're making. The new areas east of 41 will be impacted by higher density, restrictions on redevelopment, land acquisition, et cetera. So maybe that's sort of a simpler way to kind of think about what the implications are there.
What I was going to say, Mr. Sims, real quick also, is that when you look at that model, you notice that if you take Dean Street all the way to the very end where you have what is the Imperial Harbor Mobile Home Park there, that is in this area, and that's probably one of the reasons you'd want the additional restrictions because, okay, so, and that's the reason it's a weighing the options, and maybe the best is, as Dr. Banyan said, is that you can amend it under the optional, you can make some amendments. So, because, like, if you look at that map, that coastal high hazard area goes back and covers that entire area back there, which we know during Irma flooded.
It's the first thing that flooded.
Yeah,
That's Imperial Bonita, by the way.
Real Bonita, I'm sorry. Yeah, the other one's on the other side, and which is,
Harbor, yep.
which is totally different geographically as far as
Yes, it is.
elevations. So, it's a it's a mixed bag when you get down to it, and, you know,
Well, a great deal of the property that we're looking at in the future for housing in the downtown area is in this affected area. So, but it, to me, it's something that we probably, it's not going to deter anybody. It's just going to be that the projects that go in there will meet the new codes and the densities.
Right.
yeah.
But it's not going to deter anybody from doing that. I mean, this is not so restrictive, let's put it that way, that it's going to deter anybody. Not yes or no.
I don't think it's going to deter anybody.
Okay,
I think it,
that's what I wanted to hear.
it's going to make people rethink, okay, and that's probably a good idea overall.
So we don't wind up with another Quinn Street and things like that.
And, you know, and on the map there, I mean, that shows that is an area of great concern.
Of course.
Is the city still looking at buying the property in there?
They have, if they get the funding, I understand they are, but that's a,
So this may
That's
be
a
kind of
separate
moot.
deal.
Separate.
yeah.
Okay, I've still,
Public,
yeah, oh. So, talking about, he's talking about building future things based on this, and looking at people who would be flooded out, that would be affected, and could only rebuild under the new codes, under the codes that are in there now, or under this map, because they wouldn't have been before, but maybe they will be under the map if we use the CMA map option 2, I guess it is. So it would end up affecting those people a lot more, because they would have to put a lot more back, perhaps change designs of their homes, maybe their whole foundation, or,
No, not as far as I know, because you've got build-back policies in your plan
right.
that
But that.
don't say anything about this.
But they would affect them now when they wouldn't have before, if we choose
It doesn't, the boundary of the coastal management area does not affect build-back policies. There's no build-back policies that are affected, no matter what boundary you choose,
Okay, yeah.
right? So the build-back is a separate set of policies.
Okay. I guess I'm
It's
getting
not impacted by this boundary.
confused. We're either going to choose an option that would retain both of them separately, or, and the second option, combine them? Is that what we're talking?
Yeah, so option 1 would be your existing, so look at your.
Like the
future line.
CHHA?
Your existing CHHA, for lack of a more, and then we would call that your CMA. And again, it would include the new annexed areas,
And it would include, that would still include the new.
the new annexed
ones.
areas, yes.
Okay,
Option 2, you expand the boundary of your coastal management area to match the,
option 2 is not our option, it's
model.
the council's.
Council's option, yeah. No record.
well, that's really what we're asking you to weigh in on with council,
make a recommendation.
make a recommendation.
I have one last question. It has to do
Yes.
with page 104.
Yes,
In here, we talk about a policy 1.2.1.
wait. 104 in which,
Page numbers for discussion only.
On the big package.
in which element?
This concurrency management system.
Okay,
The only question is a clarification of, it talks about it, that the city shall enforce its facility level service standards for potable water, but BSU is a private company. How does this, I'm not understanding the impact of BSU and the city.
go ahead, Jackie.
We coordinate with Bonita Springs Utilities, and like Margaret said, she actually updated some of the information in this plan based on input from BSU. I think it's like every 6 or 7 years, there's a water supply plan update that is done by the water management districts that then funnel down to us, and we are required to make updates to our comprehensive plan. So there's always ongoing
Yeah, this
coordination
is
with the utilities.
in conjunction with what they do, and it was working together on this, and that's not a,
Correct, and just like, even though they're a private consumer-owned organization.
Right.
On any development applications for long-range planning, they're always a review entity on those applications for level of service purposes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and that's been consistent through all of the
So
changes.
we don't have a conflict there, right?
Yeah.
Statement of policy.
Public comment.
Okay, well, do we,
Any other questions for me? Because you can continue the discussion.
I think we are finished with you.
Okay. They know,
I was,
they've been involved in all of these conversations and debates and policy options,
well,
so.
good luck
Thank
to
you very
you.
much for being here as
Yes.
Thank
long as
you.
you have.
Don't be too hard on them if they've got their feet up on the desk.
Very helpful.
They are a sweet group of students.
I
I
don't-
mean, they're 18 and 19, but they really are just a nice little group, so.
Good.
Yeah,
Good, good.
I think I scared them enough in the beginning.
Nice seeing you again.
Thank you. I'll see you again.
I never had any
Thank you very much.
conversations like that.
No, I know. When you get back, there may be signs outside, you know.
Yeah,
She's late, she's late.
yeah, that's right.
Do-
Okay, thank you. I think I've got everything.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I don't see anybody here for public
Well, you
comment.
gotta
So,
announce it.
okay, are there any public comments? Seeing none. I think I would like
Ready
to
for a
just,
motion?
well, I was going to ask you if the discussion had sufficed and people are ready to vote. Do we want to discuss more, or are we ready?
Good to go.
Everybody's shaking their head yes, and I'm assuming it means ready.
Good to go.
Okay, good, all right. All right, does anybody want to bring the motion?
It's a simple
Right,
motion
okay,
to
Go with
my-
adopt the policy two or
okay.
whatever, whichever.
option two.
That's
Yeah,
what
I'll
I
make a
would have.
motion to accept the option two.
Okay,
I'll second that motion.
okay.
I think it requires a little bit more than that. It's a review of the entire ordinance, which needs to be included in that, I believe.
So all your recommendations are ultimately a recommendation for consistency with the comprehensive plan.
Yes.
So your
We need to
recommendation
cover the
is
whole
that
thing,
you
and
think
then-
it's consistent with the plan, but your recommendation for the changes to the coastal management are option two.
Option two.
Yeah, it would be option
So
two.
we've covered the entire thing plus option two.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, do we need to take a vote,
Yes.
Yes.
please, Michelle?
Councilwoman Gallagher,
Aye.
Committee Member Vincent,
Aye.
Committee Member Calapetro,
Aye.
Committee Member Schwartz,
Aye.
Committee Member Maturo, Committee Member Sims.
Aye.
Thank you.
Can we take a
I
couple
was,
minute break?
actually, I was going to suggest that maybe we take a 5-minute break, is that all right, or 10 minutes? What do we need?
Just enough to.
5 minutes. Thank you.
We have a new book signed.